It's the quiet that gets you, not the silence of a library or the 3 a.m. hush of a sleeping city. It's the dead quiet, the heavy pressurized stillness of a place that's been forgotten by the living, a place where time itself has coagulated. That's the first thing I learned about the sub-basement archive of Moreira, Bastos, and Sampaio. The second thing I learned is that dead is a relative term. My name is Daniel. 3 months ago, I was the walking cliché of young ambition. A newly minted lawyer, sharp suit, sharper haircut, and a coveted junior associate position at the most prestigious and oldest law firm in São Paulo. My apartment in Pinheiros was a sterile box of glass and white furniture, a monument to my belief in logic, order, and the unshakable reality of the Brazilian civil code. I didn't believe in ghosts. I believed in billable hours, precedent, and the solid, reassuring weight of a favorable judgment. My reality was controlled. It was mine. The firm was housed in a glorious, turn-of-the-century casarão near the Tribunal de Justiça, a behemoth of granite and dark mahogany. My vulnerability, if you could call it that, was my ambition. I wanted to make partner before I was 35. So, when Dr. Sampaio, the last living Sampaio of the firm's name, a man who radiated the cold authority of old money, assigned me to the Dead File Initiative, I took it as a challenge, not an insult. A rite of passage, Daniel, he'd said, his smile not reaching his eyes. We're digitizing our history, every case. You'll be in the sub-basement. It's quiet, good for focus. He wasn't wrong. The sub-basement was 2 floors beneath the polished marble lobby, beneath the hum of the city. It was a labyrinth of rolling metal shelves, crammed with tens of thousands of files bound in faded red and black leather. The air was a cocktail of mildew, decaying paper, and something metallic, like old pennies. The only sounds were the clack, clack, clack of my keyboard and the aggressive whir of the industrial scanner. The first week was just tedious. I scanned land disputes from the 1950s, tax evasions from the 60s. The routine was my shield. I'd put in my headphones, listen to podcasts about economics, and process the past, reducing it to searchable PDFs. The first crack in my reality was a sound, or the lack of one. On Tuesday of the second week, my music cut out. I pulled out my earbuds, annoyed. The whir of the scanner had also stopped. The only thing left was the oppressive, tomb-like silence. And then, from the far end of aisle 9, a sound. A single, sharp exhale, like a man clearing his throat, right next to my ear. I spun around, yanking the chair with me. Hello? Nothing. Just rows and rows of silent files. Must be the ventilation, I muttered, my voice sounding impossibly loud. I'm a rational man. Buildings make noises. Old buildings, doubly so. I went back to work, but I left the headphones off. The next day, it was the cold. São Paulo isn't a cold city, and this was a sealed basement. But a pocket of icy air began to follow me. I'd be in aisle 3, and suddenly my hands would be numb, my breath misting. I'd move to aisle 4, and it would be gone. I blamed the ancient air conditioning, even though the vents were clearly rusted shut. I was rationalizing. We do that. We build a small, comfortable box called reality, and anything that doesn't fit, we either hammer it down or pretend we didn't see it. I was pretending very, very hard. By the 3rd week, I'd reached the 1980s. The files here felt different, heavier. The political climate of the time, the unsteady transition from dictatorship to democracy, had bled into the cases. They were messier, more violent. And that's when I found the box labeled Caso Monteiro, 1983, Resolvido. The moment my fingers brushed the brittle spine of the main file, the cold wasn't just near me, it was on me. It was a suffocating, wet cold, like being plunged into a frozen lake. I recoiled, dropping the file. It hit the concrete floor with a sound like a muffled gunshot. I stared at it. Just a file. Just paper. Get a grip, Daniel, I whispered. My heart was hammering. I picked it up. It felt wrong. I opened it on my desk. The case of Ricardo Monteiro. He was a journalist, an activist, accused of the brutal murder of a high-profile politician. The evidence, as I read, was flimsy, circumstantial. But the prosecution, our firm, Morera, Bastos, and Sampaio, had been relentless. Montero's defense was simple. He was framed. He claimed he was meeting with an informant about a judicial conspiracy at the alleged time of the murder. He died in prison, 2 weeks before his appeal. Official report, suicide by hanging. As I read his sworn testimony, a single, guttural whisper echoed through the archive. "No fui you. It wasn't me." I froze. That wasn't the building. That wasn't the ventilation. It was a voice, clear, desperate, and full of a cold I recognized. Before I could process it, the single fluorescent light directly above my desk flickered. Once, twice, and then went out. Not just the bulb. The entire fixture went dark. I was left in the glow of my monitor, and in that half-light, I saw it. At the end of the aisle, standing just beyond the cone of light, was a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a void in the light, a patch of darkness shaped like a man. It didn't move. It just watched. I stared, my blood turning to sludge. I couldn't breathe. I was a man of logic, and the logic was failing. My brain screamed imagination, stress, exhaustion. But my primal self, the animal part we bury under suits and degrees, knew exactly what it was seeing. I fumbled for my phone, trying to turn on the flashlight. My fingers felt like sausages. When I finally hit the button and aimed the beam down the aisle, there was nothing there, just shelves. The light above me buzzed, flickered, and snapped back on, brighter than before. I slammed the Montero file shut. I packed my bag, my hands shaking so violently I could barely zip it. I didn't just walk, I ran from that archive. I told myself I was sick, that I needed a break, that the mold was getting to me. I rationalized it all the way home. But that night, my tidy white apartment felt wrong. The shadows in the corners were too deep. The silence was too heavy. And when I finally fell into an exhausted sleep, I dreamed. I wasn't in my bed. I was in a small, damp cell. I could feel a coarse rope against my neck, and a voice, Ricardo Montero's voice, whispered over and over, "Eles me mataram. Olhe de novo. They killed me. Look again." I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. My skepticism was dead. My control was a joke. Something was in that archive, something that had been waiting, and it wanted me to look again. My obsession with the Montero case became all-consuming. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. My colleagues at the firm started giving me wide berths. "Daniel," my cubicle neighbor Clara said, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You look terrible. Is it the archive? That place gives me the creeps." Clara was my only real friend at the firm. Pragmatic, sharp, but with an empathy the other sharks lacked. She was my ally, though she didn't know it yet. "I'm fine, Clara. Just a tough case file," I lied. But I wasn't fine. I was a man possessed. I spent my days in the archive, my skin crawling, the feeling of being watched now, a constant companion. The cold was permanent, a personal winter centered on my desk. I spent my nights online, digging into the 1983 trial. The official story was clean. The media, controlled and cautious in those years, had painted Montero as a radical extremist. But the cracks were there. I found digitized articles from small independent papers, mentions of a key witness, Montero's wife, Eliana, who had a supposed alibi for him. She vanished a week before the trial, never seen again. The police ruled it as her fleeing, an admission of her husband's guilt. I needed more. I needed someone who was there. My research led me to Afonso Reis, a name from the bylines of those old, angry articles. A retired journalist, now running a small, angry blog about judicial corruption from a tiny apartment in Bixiga. He was the Herald. I met him on a Saturday. His apartment smelled of stale cigarettes and old books. He was a frail man with fire in his eyes. When I said the name Ricardo Montero, the fire blazed. "Montero," he spat. That wasn't a trial, it was an execution, a judicial assassination. I knew he was innocent. Everyone knew, but they were powerful. "Who, Afonso? Who framed him?" He shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "You're from Morera. Bastos and Sampaio, aren't you? You're one of them. They put me in the archive, I said, my voice cracking. I think his ghost, it's in there. It's trying to tell me something. Afonso stared at me. I expected him to laugh, to call me Luco. He didn't. He just nodded slowly. That place, that firm, it's built on bones. Montero wasn't just framed for a murder he didn't commit. He was about to expose the real killers. A politician, a high court judge, and a lawyer, your firm's lawyer. He handed me a worn cardboard box. My notes, everything I could never publish. He said his wife, Eliana, had the proof, a photograph. After she disappeared, the case was over. They ruled his death a suicide. But I spoke to a prison guard, off the record. No way Montero hung himself. His neck wasn't broken. He had water in his lungs. They drowned him in his cell and strung him up. The cold I felt in the archive. The wet cold. The gurgling whisper. It wasn't a draft. It was a death rattle. I brought the notes to Dr. Sampaio. I don't know what I expected. Absolution? Help? I was naive. I was still clinging to the rational world. I sat in his opulent office, the sub-basement feeling a million miles away. I laid out Afonso's notes. I didn't mention the ghost. I framed it as a historical inconsistency I'd found. Sampaio listened, his fingers steepled. He didn't look at the notes. He just looked at me. His expression was one of profound disappointment. "Daniel," he said, his voice as smooth as polished wood. "Your job is to digitize files, not to indulge in journalistic fantasies from a bygone era. The Montero case is closed. It was a great victory for this firm, a victory that cemented our reputation." He leaned forward. "A reputation you are now part of. Do not question our history. Do you understand me?" The threat was unspoken but crystal clear. My career, my future, hung on this. I was isolated. The institution I had worshipped was not just complicit, it was the architect of the crime. That night, I went back to the archive. I was terrified, but I was also furious. I was a lawyer, and this was the ultimate injustice. The ghost was waiting. The cold was so intense it burned. "Okay, Ricardo," I whispered into the darkness. "I believe you. Sampaio knows. He's part of it. What did Eliana have? Where is it?" The exhale came from right behind me. "Eles. Them." The lights in the aisle began to strobe. The heavy, leather-bound files on the shelves around me began to vibrate. One by one, they shot out, hitting the floor like missiles. A vortex of paper and dust filled the air. It wasn't a presence anymore. It was a poltergeist. It was raw, unadulterated rage. I cowered behind my desk. The ghost was showing me its power. It was showing me what Sampaio and his friends had uncorked. Through the paper storm, I was drawn back to the original Montero file, still on my desk. My hands, guided by a force that was not my own, picked it up. My fingers, numb with cold, went not to the pages, but to the binding. The thick, leather-bound cover. I pulled. The spine, brittle with age, cracked open. Tucked inside, hidden between the leather and the cardboard backing, was a folded, yellowed piece of paper. A photograph. My blood ran colder than the room. It was a picture of 3 men at a churrascaria, arms around each other, laughing. They were holding up glasses of whiskey. In the background, a calendar on the wall clearly read, Outubro, 1983, the night of the politician's murder. One man was the murdered politician himself. The second man, younger, was a face I recognized from the tribunal's gallery, Justice Barreto, now one of the most powerful judges in the country. The third man, smiling, his eyes cold even in the grainy photo, was a 40-year-old Dr. Sampaio. This was Eliana's alibi, not for her husband, but for the killers. They weren't enemies. They were partners. Montero hadn't just been framed. He'd been silenced. The moment I understood, the paper storm ceased. The room fell into an abyss of silence. The temperature dropped to freezing. "Justiça," The voice gurgled. It was no longer a whisper. It was a demand. I looked up from the photo. He was there, Ricardo Montero. He wasn't a shadow. He was standing in front of my desk, fully formed. He was bloated, his skin a pale, purplish blue. His suit was soaked, dripping water onto the concrete floor. His eyes were wide, white, and staring. A dark, ugly ligature mark was bruised into his throat, but his mouth was open, and a thin trickle of brackish water ran from his lips. He raised a single waterlogged finger and pointed, first at the photo, then at me, then at the archive door. I grabbed the photo and Afonso's notes. "I'll do it," I stammered. "I'll get it out." I ran for the door. I fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't turn. I pulled. It was locked, from the outside. A low, rumbling laugh echoed through the archive. It wasn't Montero's. "You should have left it alone, Daniel." Sampaio's voice, coming from an intercom speaker I'd never noticed, caked in dust. He had been watching me. The firm's history was protected. The lights in the entire archive exploded simultaneously, showering me in glass and plunging me into absolute, primordial darkness. The only light was the pale, sickly luminescence radiating from the drowned ghost. The only sound was my own frantic breathing and the drip, drip, drip of spectral water hitting the floor. "Sampaio, let me out," I screamed, banging on the heavy steel door. The entity of Ricardo Montero drifted towards me. His face was inches from mine. The smell was unbearable, stagnant water and decay. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me, at the door. He opened his mouth, and what came out wasn't a sound, but a force, a concussive blast of cold and rage. The steel door buckled outward, the frame groaning. On the other side, I heard a scream. Clara. "Daniel, what's happening? The door is frozen." She had come for me, my ally. "Clara, get back, call the police," I yelled. Montero's ghost reared back, its form flickering. It was furious, but not at me. It was furious at its cage. The heavy metal shelves, the ones weighing hundreds of kilos, began to topple over like dominoes, one after another, crashing down the aisle, aimed straight at me. I dove out of the way, skidding on the damp floor. The shelf where I'd been standing seconds before was crushed flat. The ghost wasn't trying to kill me. It was hurting me. It was an intelligence, blind with rage, using me as its instrument. "He's trapped," I heard Clara yell, her voice frantic. The ghost raised its arms. The air crackled. I wasn't just a lawyer. I was a sacrifice, caught between a conspiracy of the living and the fury of the dead. I saw the last massive shelf at the end of the aisle, the one holding the entire 1940s collection, begin to tilt. It was over. Then, the archive door burst open, not from the ghost, but from Clara, wielding a fire extinguisher she'd used to smash the lock. "Daniel, run!" I scrambled, crawling over fallen files, the photo clutched in my fist. I burst through the doorway, Clara grabbing my arm and pulling me into the sterile hallway of the basement. We slammed the heavy door shut. The last thing I saw was Montero's face, pressed against the small wire glass window, his mouth open in a silent, suffocating scream. The glass instantly frosted over, cracking from the cold. We didn't take the elevator. We ran up the emergency stairs, bursting into the grand cathedral-like lobby of Morera, Bastos, and Sampaio. It was after 10 p.m. The only person there was Dr. Sampaio, standing by the main entrance, flanked by two large men in dark suits who were definitely not lawyers. "A unfortunate incident in the archive, Daniel?" Sampaio's voice was calm, but his eyes were black with panic. He had seen us on the security feed. "And you, Miss Clara, working late. Please, give me the file you're holding." "It's over, Sampaio," I panted, holding up the photograph. "I know what you did. What you, Barreto, and the politician did. I know you killed Montero." Sampaio's mask of civility finally dropped. He looked old and tired. "You have no idea what you're meddling in. That history paid for this building. It paid for your salary. It paid for the order we live in." He nodded to his men. "Get the photo, and them. make it look like a robbery, a tragedy. The neighborhood is so dangerous after all. The two men advanced. Clara screamed. I braced myself. This was it. A squalid end in a marble lobby. And then, the temperature in the 3-story lobby dropped by 50 degrees. The grand crystal chandelier above us, a 2-ton masterpiece of light, began to swing, its crystals chiming like a funeral dirge. All the lights in the lobby began to flicker, not with an electrical pulse, but with a wet, gurgling rhythm. Sampaio looked up, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He, too, could feel it. He's here, I whispered. The ghost of Ricardo Montero did not materialize slowly. It exploded into the center of the lobby. It was no longer just a man. It was a 20-foot-tall vortex of spectral rage, papers from the archive swirling around it like a hurricane. The face within it was massive, roaring its silent, drowned scream. Sampaio's men froze. Sampaio himself fell backward, scrambling away. It wasn't my idea, Sampaio whimpered, staring at the apparition. He was going to ruin us. It was Justiça. The ghost paused. It turned its massive, raging head toward Sampaio. It tilted its head, as if considering the word. Justiça, it boomed, the voice shaking the very foundation of the building. With a sound like a cannon shot, the ghost rocketed upward, straight into the chandelier. The ancient chain holding it snapped like thread. Clara, move! I tackled her, rolling us behind a marble pillar. The chandelier, all 2 tons of crystal and steel, plummeted. It didn't hit us. It didn't hit the men. It struck the exact spot where Dr. Sampaio was crouched, burying him in an avalanche of glass and twisted metal. Silence. The cold vanished. The swirling papers dropped to the floor. The ghost was gone. Sampaio's men had already fled. There was only me, Clara, and the wreckage. Supernatural justice had been served. The confrontation wasn't a battle. It was an execution. We didn't go to the police. We went to Afonso. The story, backed by the photo, Afonso's decades of notes, and an anonymous tip about Sampaio's accidental death, was a bomb. It exploded across the Brazilian media. The Montero Innocence Project became a national sensation. Justice Barreto was impeached, his conspiracy exposed. Moreira, Bastos, and Sampaio imploded, its reputation shattered, its history finally, truly, brought to light. I won. I got justice for Ricardo Montero. But I am a scarred man. I quit the law. I couldn't. How can you argue precedent and civil code when you have seen the other court? The one that convenes in the shadows, with judges of pure rage and sentences of cold iron? Clara and I, we're together. We're survivors, bonded by a trauma no one else on earth could ever understand. We live quietly. We move to a small coastal town. I help Afonso, remotely, with his blog. He investigates cold cases. I've become his specialist in the unusual ones. I am no longer the man of logic. I am the marked witness. I know the paper-thin veil of our reality can be torn open. I know that true evil, the kind Sampaio represented, is a debt. And that debt, sooner or later, will be collected. The ghost of Ricardo Montero, I thought, was at peace. His name was cleared. His killers were punished. But I was wrong. The evil wasn't truly defeated. It was just redirected. Last night, I was sitting in my new, safe office, looking out at the ocean. I saw my reflection in the glass. For a second, just a flicker, Ricardo was standing behind me. He wasn't the rotting, drowned thing. He was the man from the file photos. Sharp suit, determined eyes. He looked at me in the reflection. He nodded once, a single, sharp gesture of thanks, and he was gone. I felt a moment of peace, the first in months. It was over. Then, from the corner of the quiet room, a new sound, the scratch of a pen on paper. I turned. Nothing. Then, a whisper. Not the gurgling, watery voice of Montero. This was a new voice. A woman's. Dry, frail, and filled with a different kind of pain. Mia Jude. Help me. I didn't solve a case. I opened a door. And the dead, the wronged, the victims of conspiracies and forgotten tragedies. They all know where I live now. They know there's a lawyer who will listen, and they are waiting their turn.